Good morning, North Middle School students. Today we're going to start with 4 big chunks of clay and about this size. And we're going to start with a big cookie size shape of clay. And I'm going to set that aside for just a minute and talk about these chunks first. I think I'll start with this one. First of all, what you want to do is press in the corners so that you have a kind of a round cylinder shape. We want to make it look like kind of the shape of a big fat glue stick. And we are going to create a coil, C-O-I-L, coil. This is going to be the very first part of your coil pot. And the beginning of your coil pot has to have a good coil. So once I get kind of a fat glue stick shape, I lay it on my table. And my trick to doing this, now different teachers will tell you different ways, but I think the easiest way to do it is to spread your fingers out, put them in the middle, and kind of roll the coil out. As you roll the coil out, you're using your fingertips and the length of your fingers, but as you roll, you're pulling your fingers out, kind of fanning them out in an outward motion. Now, when you do this, it will lengthen the clay. And you don't want to touch the clay very firmly. It's a very light touch. And as you touch and roll and pull your fingers out, keeping your fingers kind of fanned out like that, it will lengthen the clay into a coil. Your goal is to make a snake-like or a rope-like piece of clay. Now, you can see my clay is starting to flatten out. If it starts to flatten out, you need to stop, kind of roll it back into a round shape, because once your clay flattens out, it will not go back into a round cylinder. Again, it'll just get flatter and flatter. Got a little bit of a bump right here. I'm going to smooth it out. So it takes a few minutes, but not long. It doesn't even take a few minutes. It takes a few seconds. Kind of work it back into a cylinder shape and then continue rolling. Now this is going to go out of the viewfinder, but hopefully you can see that my coil is getting longer. And my goal is to make it about the thickness of a fat marker. If I were to hold this king-size Sharpie next to it, you can see it's thinner than a king-size Sharpie. So I'm really looking for the thickness of a regular size marker. And thicker than a pencil. Now, I want to try to keep uniform thickness all the way through. So if I end up with a section of my coil that's a little bit thicker than another part, what I'm going to do is bring my rolling fingers together and it'll thicken up the thin part. Or if I have a part that is too thick and I need to thin it out, I'll focus just on rolling that section for a minute. But at the same time, I need to keep all the rest of the coil going. Now, I've got a pretty long coil here. I'm going to kind of rope it around so you can see it's thicker on this part, this end, than it is on this end. So you won't be able to see the whole thing, but I'm going to focus just on this side of the coil until it thins out and it's about the same thickness as the rest of the coil. Now, that took just a few seconds. If I kind of spiral it, you can see it's about the same thickness all the way through. I'm going to set this aside and don't want to take any class time showing you this, but I'm going to repeat the same process with all of my chunks of clay. I'm going to kind of push in those corners once again so that I'm creating a cylinder shape, just kind of gently pushing it in. Once I get it into kind of a cylinder shape, then I'm ready to start rolling it. Starting in the middle, fingers fanned out, rolling from the middle outward, and that's what lengthens the clay and creates the coil. The coil, once again, is a rope-like or a snake-like piece of clay. You might remember doing something like this with Play-Doh when you were in kindergarten. Clay is a little bit harder to work with, but you can do so much more with it than you can do with Play-Doh. I got it a little bit flat again, and the flatness comes from pressing a little bit too hard. You really have to keep a very, very light touch on the coils. Okay, I'm going to set this aside for right now and come back to it later. What I'd like to show you next is how to create the very bottom base of your coil pot. We are going to use a slab instead of a coil for our base, and I'm going to start out with a big chunk of clay and kind of press it into a gigantic cookie shape. If you kind of remember what Mrs. Field's chocolate chip cookies look like, they're giant and delicious. Don't eat it, but that's about the size you want and about the thickness you want. Now I'm going to be using a plastic sheet and press it down a little bit more in a rolling pin. Now the trick to using a rolling pin correctly is to stand up over the rolling pin, over your clay, and put your hands on top of the rolling pin. If you put your hands on the handles, you don't have quite as much control. So the handles are there, but I prefer that you not use them. You're going to start in the middle and roll outward, but not all the way off the edge of the clay. Now I like to use plastic sheets because as I roll, I can turn the sheet and keep an even pressure all the way around, and it will cause my clay to roll out in kind of a circular form, keeping that circle form instead of going into an oval or a square. And if it starts to get a little bit longer in one spot, I can just turn it in that direction. And once again, I don't want to press too hard. If I press really hard, it's going to stick onto my rolling pin and I'll have to start all over again. Now, the one thing I do use the handles for is at the very end. I kind of hold onto the handles lightly and just spin over to see if it feels even, which it does. Now, this is a pretty good slab, and I'm going to hold it up so you can see. You want a thickness of about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/3 of an inch, about like that. And then I'm going to flip my clay slab over by putting my hand on top, inverting, and carefully peeling the plastic off. You'll see it's a little bit rougher on the back. Lay it back on the plastic. And with my stylus, now a stylus is a drawing utensil for clay. It's just a wooden stick with a point. And I'm going to very lightly sketch my name in the bottom, kind of press it down. And you're going to put an A day if you're in the A class, a B day if you're in the B day class. Kind of press it down a little bit. That's going to be the bottom of my coil pot. And then I'm going to flip it back over again. Now for my template, I'm going to use a CD. I'm going to put it right in the middle and kind of clean off any extra clay you have on your stylus. And what you want to do is hold the stylus upright and very lightly trace around the CD. You're not digging deep with the stylus, you're just drawing lightly. Then pull the CD off. And I'm using a plastic knife. You can use the kind that come from the school cafeteria. Hold it straight up at a right degree angle and slice through the clay. Now it's important that you don't saw, because if you saw the clay, it's going to stretch your clay out. You just want to slice through and turn the plastic as you slice so that you're always pulling the knife towards you. In this case, it's a plastic knife. It's not going to hurt you. So you can pull the knife towards you. You have a little bit more control that way. And as you can see, I'm kind of going off to the edge rather than making a continuous cut all the way around. This gives me a slightly more neat cut. And I'm pulling the extra clay off my knife as I cut so that I have a clean cut. And then once I'm finished, I put my hand back under the plastic and just pull away all the excess clay. Now this is my base, and I will start building my coils on top of the base. Now if this is as far as you get today, what you'll need to do is take your fingers and press in the edges slightly. The goal is just to give a smooth edge, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to flatten that edge. You don't want to make it thinner. You just want to give it a smooth finish. And if you're storing it today, you're going to take your plastic sheet, fold over the top, fold it back, and then put it inside your plastic bag. Store it inside your tote tray. If you have a Ziploc bag, that works the best. Lay it flat inside your bag, get all the air out, and then zip it closed. This will go inside your storage tote tray until our next class. Now, if you have time to start building on your clay base, you're going to take that coil and just leave your base on the plastic sheet, and you're going to take your coil and start building. Now, we're going to do a method for joining clay called score and slip. And scoring is when you take your stylus or some other cutting tool, and it's kind of like you're creating Velcro in your clay. You're going to cut little slashes along the edge. Now, I don't go all the way to the edge because I don't want it to show on the outside. And then I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to make slashes on the top of my coil. And I only do this for my first coil. This clay is moist enough that it's not necessary to do it on all of them. So I'm making knife slashes in this one. And like I said, it's going to work kind of like Velcro. You want these pieces to stick together. I'm going to see if I've made it long enough. Okay, I need a little bit more. So I'm going to cut a few more pieces. And then I'm going to remove it and add a little bit of water. Now, the water is being used in lieu of slip. Slip is a very wet glue type clay, and it's used like a glue. But this clay is so moist, if we just add a little bit of water, it kind of creates its own glue. Now, what I'm doing is I'm placing it on top of the base, and I'm trying to use my fingers to line it up right with the edge of the base. I'm not pressing down very firmly yet. And with my knife, I'm going to trim the excess coil. And with my fingers, I'm going to attach these two ends to make it look like, kind of like a ring. And then I'm going to smooth this out a bit, and then I'm going to press it down just a little bit, because I want those notches, those little cuts that I made, to attach real well. I need a really firm base, and that means these pieces have to be attached well so that they don't pop off while they're drying. Clay has got a lot of water in it, so when it dries it shrinks, and if you don't have these pieces firmly attached as it's drying, it will pop apart. We do not want that to happen. If that happens, you'll have to start all over again. So there's my first coil. What I'm going to do with my second coil is add another ring. Now I'm going to kind of set this aside for just a minute, roll this coil just a little bit more, and that's pretty much all you need to know for today. Before you leave class today, I'd like for you to have at least 3 coils built up. If you're in the class that has the extra time and you can build up coils, you need 3 coils finished before you leave. If you're in the class that's doing only the base, you're going to store your base and start your coils the next time you come to class. So I'm going to roll my coil a little bit more, make it just a little bit thinner. And as I said, this one I'm not going to score because this is super moist clay and it's going to attach itself really well. It's a little bit wide on this end, so I'm going to cut part of it off and start stacking the second coil. Now I don't cut it until I know how big I need it. I make sure I have it lined up as evenly with this first coil as I possibly can. Now here's a little hint for you too. I've made lots of coil pots. If you're new to this, it's much better to make your coils a little bit too thick than a little bit too thin. Mine are a little bit on the thin side because I'm used to making coils. If you're new to this, you've never done coils, you're not sure of what you're doing, it's much better to start off a little bit too thick, especially for your base, because what you're going to do next is you're going to put your hand in the back, and with your fingers and thumbs you're going to press these together. That means you're going to lose a little bit of the thickness there, and you want the inside to look like it's all one piece. Now you can take your stylus, you could also take a fork if you have a fork. You're going to kind of score the edges on the inside to kind of bring them together. I'm going to show you one side. Won't do the whole thing. And once that's scored, you just kind of pull those together. As I said, you will not need water at this point because this clay is very moist. And if you add the extra water, you might be making it too moist. Now this is how you want it to look all the way around. To keep it from going out too far, it is important to hold your hand in the back to support it. Because as you build your coil pot up, you want to make sure these first few coils are going straight up so that you have a strong base and a strong support for the rest of your entire project. Now, step 1 is almost complete. I've got one more coil I'm going to add, but we'll stop right here and let you get started on your project. Thank you very much and have fun creating your coil pot.